What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. I've been getting a lot of questions from you all about Adaptive Swarm, optimal gameplay, how to min-max it in Mythic Plus, and how I'm kind of playing with it. So I wanted to talk you through that and make this video on it, and then what I'll probably do is do a follow-up video where I watch back through a key and I discuss things like my Adaptive Swarm usage and all that kind of stuff, and we can talk about it in another video. But in this video here today, I wanted to take you through a document produced by Cheesy, who is like a Feral Druid theory crafter, and made this document back in Shadowlands, which is still very relevant to today. Of course, we can ignore any of the Shadowlands related systems like Forset and Legendaries and all that kind of stuff, but what we can take from it is the specifics on beekeeping. So how to optimize your actual swarm spreading and the maintenance of your colony, which is kind of cool. And then, of course, there is also some nice UI and weak aura stuff that you can use to help with this. I know a lot of people say, oh, Psy, I just use a weak aura. It tells me when to press swarm on who, and then I do that. Yeah, amazing. That's awesome. So you can do that. There's also some LVUI stuff, and then, yeah, a list of like bugs and issues and stuff with swarm. I'm not too sure if these have been fixed yet or not, but just something that you can kind of read through and keep an eye on yourself. Now, when am I actually using this build? I've been using this build that I put together. This is like nothing to do with Cheesy. I don't want to say that this is his build and then he's getting people going, why are you using a terrible build like Psy? But this is the build that I'm currently using, so it takes double adaptive here. You get a Rhydord, which increases your like split chance of these swarms. So I have used this pretty much every week so far into Dragonflight, and we're like 3 weeks in. The reason being, it's really good on 4, especially higher key levels, and also it was really good on Tyrannical with Bursting Grievous because you had really good additional healing. This itself will do something like 3 to 6%, or well, yeah, 3 to about 5.5% of your damage just from the Adaptive Swarm tick. And then, of course, there's the additional healing. I can get anywhere from 2.5 million additional healing. Well, I think I've had as high as like 3 million, 4 million healing from Adaptive Swarm in a dungeon. So it's really helpful as well for the healer, especially when you're running Nature's Vigil. Helps keep the group alive, helps keep you alive. If you're alive, you get to do more damage. Big. And I would say it's good in high key levels, medium density. If you're on very low target density, or things are dying very quickly, so like low level keys, anything beneath like a 15 probably, or if you're on Tyrannical week, where again things are dying very quickly, then it probably isn't fantastic. Though high key levels and fortified, really good. And then just situationally, if you feel comfortable with it, give it a try and see if you like it. But that's enough kind of like rambling about the specifics of it. I want to then go into kind of the priority. So there's a few things. I'm not going to read through absolutely everything here. As I said, this is a very long document and you can read through it in your own time. I will link it for you in the description. But there are some very basic things here. So if you're running Circle, which you should be, one Adaptive Swarm use will last, if you don't refresh it, that is, it'll last 27 seconds. So 9 seconds each stack, and then it'll jump twice, right? So 3 lots of 9, it works out to like 27 seconds. And then there are a few things here which are kind of cool. So the application is, or the amplification is, it's a dynamic effect. It's not a snapshot, which means that you can apply your bleeds and then use Adaptive Swarm on the target. You don't have to pre-apply Adaptive Swarm before you apply your bleeds. So something very important to note. It's also very good if you like are going into combat. You can pre-apply it to yourself, or before you start a dungeon, before you start key, you can apply it on allies and build up a bunch of stacks, and then you can start the key, or you can go into combat, whatever, and you'll immediately kind of throw swarms on everybody, which is really good. And you can keep your colonies going in between pulls, which is something to consider. But the amplification buff does not affect Frenzy Band, which is unfortunate. Frenzy Band is a talent there, which you can check out. But also the amplification buffs the initial hit of your dots. So Primal Wrath, Rake, Thrash, Lunar Inspiration, like all your initial hits from your bleed, from your periodic effects, they will also be amplified by Adaptive Swarm. And also Tiger's Fury buffs the periodic damage of Swarm from the first stack. If it's jumping around, it won't then do it, but that's kind of cool. Apparently it's very minimal, pretty much irrelevant, something interesting. And then Circle of Life and Death will speed up your spreading of your swarms, which can be beneficial or kind of bad depending on the situation. Generally it's a good thing because you can spread more onto more enemies. In general, it'll jump from enemies with no swarm on them. It'll then prioritize jumping to enemies with rip on them, which is irrelevant because you're always going to have Prom Wrath on everything. And then it'll prioritize enemies with swarm on them at random. So if everything already has swarm on them, then it'll kind of just jump to somebody, you know, and refresh there. Because swarm, when you initially apply it, it has 3 stacks, but it can go as high as 5 stacks. So you can keep spreading it and get it as high as 5 stacks, which is the way you want to be playing. You want as many stacks as possible. Because if it's at 5 stacks, then it has a chance to jump to 2 targets of 4. Then those 4s can then jump to 2 additional targets of 3. And then those 3 can then jump to 2 additional targets of 2. Yada, yada, yada. And so on and so forth. So you can kind of, from one 5-stack swarm, you can go quite far. Obviously, it's not guaranteed chance. So it'll always kind of prioritize enemies if there are enemies without swarm in them. And then it will go on to prioritizing allies. And it'll always jump to the opposite target. So if you apply it to an enemy, it'll then jump to an ally and then back to an enemy. From a friendly, it'll then jump to an enemy and then back to a friendly. So it'll always try and do that. If you're out of combat, it'll obviously just apply to like friendlies and yada yada yada. Apart from that, that's like most of the kind of stuff. Swarm is really good in medium densities where things are consistently alive for a long time. It doesn't perform as well, like things that negatively kind of affect your colony, because the aim of the game is to have as big a colony as possible going throughout the key continuously. So anytime you're on low target counts like a boss, or you're on really high target counts like Academy, first, you know, boss of the tree, anytime you're in those situations, you're losing your swarm colony because it's going to keep spreading in high densities, and they'll eventually just dissipate. And on low targets, you can't spread to that many enemies, so when they jump off your allies, they're all going to go into the same location. So that's kind of some things to consider there. One thing I would note when you're playing on a single target, and I'm going to skip through some of this, but when you're playing on a single target, you basically, if you have a healthy swarm going into the single target, then keep applying it to allies. If you're going into a single target and you don't have a healthy swarm, then just apply it to the enemy. And basically, you're just going to continue the duration of your swarms jumping, right? But I won't go too much into that, but that's something that you can read through, but it kind of just makes sense. Now, going through the priority list, I'm going to go through the advanced priority list because I think it makes sense to just learn it once and just learn it correctly. So the way it will prioritize applying to allies, it'll apply to an ally with 2 stacks, then 1 stack, then 3 stacks, then 0. This means that you're wasting the fewest amount of swarms because this 3 plus 2 makes 5, which is the best, and then 1 plus 3 makes 4, which is the second best, and then 3 plus 3 makes 6, which means you lose 1 stack every time it does that. And then an ally with 0 stacks is just like the last kind of situation. If pulling within a few seconds, so you're about to go into a big pull, you can also just hold and use it on an enemy. I generally don't really do this, but sure. You generally don't want to wait to delay ally stacks jumping to enemies. Yeah, so like if you're about to go into a big pull, you don't want to reapply it to an ally that it's about to tick off of, because you want it to jump from your allies to your enemies as quickly as possible. So be smart with it. Just think about it, right? Prioritize refreshing 3 stacks to 5 for the best colony building, such as when there's longer time periods between packs or ramping up at the start of a dungeon. So I was saying this, before the start of a dungeon, I am just spreading swarms on everybody for a good couple minutes. Yeah, not holding anybody hostage, fortunately. And then you're prioritizing 1 or 0 stacks over a 3 stack, and even over a 2 stack, if you're pulling soon, and your goal is more coverage, right? So if you have, it gives an example. For example, if Berserk is up, or you know your tank is going to pull big, getting bees on the maximum amount of mobs possible is better than having fewer but larger stacks. So if you're going into like medium density, you just want like big stacks on every mob. But if you're like about to go into a pull and it's jumping off allies, it's no point having like, it's better to have, I guess, like an ally with 2 stacks and 1 ally with 3 stacks than one ally with 5 stacks, because then that's only going to do 2 jumps, right? Whereas if you have a 3 stack and a 2 stack, then each of those will then jump once. So you have 4 enemies with your swarm on, which is going to be better than 2 enemies with your swarm on, right? So just think about it logically. But simple TLDR is get as many 5 and 4 stacks as you can. Now, when applying to enemies, it'll prioritize enemies with 2 stacks, then enemies with 1 stack, then enemies with no bees, or this is how you should prioritize it, I should say. enemies with 2 stacks, then 1 stack, then enemies with no bees, and then enemies with a large stack of 4 or 5 that's going to expire soon. And you wait for it to jump and then cast it on them when they have no stacks. And this basically means that as soon as that's ticked off, you've immediately reapplied it. But something to caveat with this is sometimes if you're in a pool and you know that your allies have swarms on them, just wait a second if the enemy is if the allies are about to expire, because they might jump to an enemy that you were just about to apply swarm to. So sometimes when things are about to expire, sometimes it can be wise to just wait a second and just see where these swarms bounce and then apply. But yeah, you want to prioritize enemies with 2 stacks, because then that'll go up to 5, and then 4, and then no bees, and then enemies with 3 stacks that's about to expire, because you want to try and make sure that it's going to expire with as many stacks as possible. And then allies with 1 or no stacks if all enemies have bees and a healthy duration. Basically, you should almost always cast bees offensively here. You can hold briefly to refresh for an enemy for overall higher uptime. Naturally, other variables come into play, such as priority targets and whatnot, which further influence how you might use bees. This is the joy of beekeeping, a lot of decision making. If you're about, don't need to worry about that. And then Prio 5, this is situational and depends on the number of targets. You lose 1 stack, so situation 5 was here, enemies with 3 stacks that is about to expire. So in this situation, you lose 1 stack by refreshing a 3 stacker, but it results in more uptime on that 1 target and offers long-term colony gain, because a 5 stack can then split into 2 4 stacks. So if you're in a medium density, I would say like this is better kind of spreading. If you're in mass AoE, then yeah, I don't know. The logic behind Prio 6 is rather than holding, just get 1 ticking down on an ally, because then that can then jump to an enemy eventually anyway, and then you're just kind of continuing the building of the colony. And then whenever you're on a boss or a single target, if you have a colony going, at least 2-3 healthy stacks, and Swarm is already on the boss, then you cast on allies with 1 stack, or then cast on an ally with no stack. So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where like you want to mainly cast on your allies, so then you kind of are just ping-ponging. And there's a really good term that you guys can actually look out for in Control F in the document, but it's called swapping or ping-ponging. So if you look at these, you can see these terms and kind of get some more information on those. So swap or ping-pong. And then yeah, that's like most of it. I'm not going to go through the simple priority list, but basically the priority list is when you're in between pulls, cast on an ally, just remember 2, 1, 3, 0. And when you're on an enemy, remember 2, 1, 0, 3. That's what I kind of remember. And that's how I kind of do it. But there's always going to be ways that you can improve this. You can always do it a little bit better than previously. Every run is going to be different depending on pull timers and how you pull the packs and your chances of it splitting and all that kind of stuff, and how lucky you get or unlucky you get, and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to just break it down a little bit, give you guys this document, and also give you the freedom to look through it, but then also discuss around it a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to review a video next of me, well, I'm going to review a key of me in a dungeon, looking at my swarm use and kind of discussing optimal play. So I'm going to do that for you guys, and we can talk about it, and then you at least have some visual representation. So that will be coming. But that's today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to come check me out on twitch.tv/Psybear_TV in the description. Thank you, and goodbye.